HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Brain Food, The Surprising Science of Eating for Cognitive Power by Lisa Mosconi, Ph.D. Read by Norah Tocci. Preface. A few years ago, I delivered the keynote at an international conference on the prevention of Alzheimer's disease. It was a beautiful sunny day in Italy. The lecture hall brimming with doctors, students, and laymen, all eager to hear the latest on pharmacological treatments for Alzheimer's. I was much less eager to be the bearer of bad news. Unfortunately, current medications for Alzheimer's lessen symptoms for a limited amount of time, but cannot stop the damage that aging and disease cause to brain cells. A new generation of disease-modifying drugs is under development, but clinical trials have yielded mostly disappointing results so far, confirming what everyone knew: there is no cure in sight. At which point, someone in the audience asked, "How about olive oil?" My neuroscience-trained brain was baffled. Olive oil? Olive oil was not in any of my research proposals, or in any way part of my education. I got my Ph.D. in neuroscience and nuclear medicine to focus on the genetic aspects of the disease, motivated in part by seeing its devastating effects on my immediate family. My work for the last 15 years has been focused on the early detection of Alzheimer's. Specifically, in my research, I use brain imaging techniques, such as magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, and positron emission tomography, PET, to look at people's brains in relationship to their genetic backgrounds, and in doing so, learn about their likelihood of developing disease. This work led me to direct the Family History of Alzheimer's Research Program at the NYU School of Medicine back in 2009. The program focuses on the children and family members of Alzheimer's patients. Everyone there has broadly the same concern: am I at risk for Alzheimer's, and what can I do to make sure I don't get it? Over the years, I experienced a change in the kinds of questions I was asked by our patients, much like the olive oil question at the conference. Beyond the discussions about genes and DNA, sooner or later, the conversation turned to food. What should I eat to keep my brain healthy? While all my research draws on my education as an adult, everything I associate with food comes from my upbringing in Florence, Italy. Back in my hometown, I developed a heartfelt appreciation for wholesome, healthy food from a very young age, which I took for granted until I moved to the United States to study for my Ph.D. I had not anticipated the challenge of finding a flavorful tomato, or the artery-clogging danger hidden within a seemingly innocent chocolate chip cookie. As I struggled with my own diet in my new environment, I learned from my research that I was not alone. By their own accounts, more than half of my study participants reported only trace amounts of vegetables and fruits in their diets. Little by little, it became clear that I wasn't just far from home. I was also far from the original thesis about the genetic aspects of dementia. In fact, it turns out that the role of genetics in Alzheimer's and dementia in general is not as major as we previously thought. While some patients carry aggressive genetic mutations that cause dementia, for the vast majority of the population, risk is influenced by a variety of medical and lifestyle factors, including a person's diet. When my research revealed how important and how oddly neglected diet and nutrition had been in the field, I went back to school and completed a third degree in integrative nutrition. I drew upon that and other work to found the Nutrition and Brain Fitness Lab at NYU, with the goal of identifying lifestyle factors that support the brain's health, safeguarding it against dementia. A few years later, I initiated the brain nutrition coursework and began teaching at the NYU Steinhardt School's Department of Nutrition and Food Studies. Around the same time, I moved to Weill Cornell Medical College, where I have the honor of serving as the Associate Director of the first Alzheimer's prevention clinic in the country. The clinic's innovative approach includes pharmaceutical as well as behavioral interventions aimed at improving both medical status and lifestyle choices in an Alzheimer's preventative way. Diet and nutrition are a big part of the practice. Altogether, this work has led me to dive headfirst into the complex relationship between our brains and the foods we eat, and to educate the public as to how to eat healthfully for their brains. As with anyone who has ever gone down a dietary path toward optimal nutrition, I quickly realized that the available advice was often conflicting and incoherent. But as a scientist, I was above all surprised at the volume and effect of pseudoscientific information available on the Internet, especially in comparison with how little had been published with the rigor of peer-reviewed medical journals. We've heard a lot about what is and isn't good for our brains. For example, many of us have recently become aware of an American gluten panic. But only a few years ago, grains were considered the epitome of eating healthy, and people were terrified of eating fatty foods. The problem is that while many of the recommendations you can find online promote a scientific worldview, very few have been substantiated by sound research. The Internet and media in particular have a tendency to make broad extrapolations on limited findings and sensationalize everything. For instance, at least once a week, someone will ask my opinion on the latest miracle drug for Alzheimer's. I'll look up the study. More often than not, it's true that the drug worked, but in a population of 10 mice. So that's great news if you are one of those 10 mice. Whether or not those findings are relevant to people is a whole different story. This is where scientific literacy comes into play. Which sources of information are the most credible? How can we know if the study we heard about in the evening news is worth acting upon? While sound scientific research is more limited than Internet blogs, results do prove to be consistent. A new generation of studies has begun to identify which nutrients are particularly helpful in enabling our brains to work at the max, as well as protecting them as we age, thereby granting us continued mental strength over the course of a lifetime. At the same time, we are also learning which nutrients are harmful to the brain, negatively affecting our cognitive abilities and increasing the risk of mental deterioration. This includes my personal experience, accumulated over years of hands-on research regarding the important interactions among genetics, nutrition, and lifestyle. What's important to note is that I'm not just presenting the results of my own research, but rather the analysis of hundreds of scientists who have been studying the relationship between the foods we eat and the health of our brains over the decades. I'm hoping to make clear that science is never a result of one person's opinion, but always involves a collective of doctors, scientists, and even you, the population itself, in an ongoing educational exchange that unfolds over time. Thanks to this worldwide dedication, we challenge one another to get to the bottom of those things we're most determined to resolve. In fact, the beauty of science should be strength in numbers. The danger of looking at isolated papers is that you might find that what appears to be fact in one study is proven wrong in the next. One day you read that, according to science, you must avoid cholesterol at all costs. Then you turn around to find another equally scientific explaining the role cholesterol plays in supporting a healthy brain. How can both things be true? Ultimately, no single study is perfect. One can never be absolutely sure that its findings are valid and applicable to the population at large. We need to look at a bigger picture. The more an independent study replicates a specific finding and insists upon applying a wide range of methods to an equally wide number of patients, the more likely that the finding is actually true and applicable to everyone. Make no mistake, there is a bottom line when it comes to what's good for your brain and what's not. In Brain Food, I draw on my background as a neuroscientist to bring a neurological and nutritional framework around the ways that food is specifically vital in promoting optimal brain health. In the sections that follow, we will get down to the details of what science has discovered so far by exploring neuronutrition, or nutrition for the brain. We'll look at how food breaks down into nutrients and to what degree these nutrients feed our brains. We'll talk about how the brain actually works and the specific influence diet has on our cognitive performance. But mostly, we'll see how the human brain has its own unique diet, different from that of the rest of the body. Just as we would eat differently to slim down than to train for a triathlon, when optimizing for long-term cognitive health, the brain has its own demands. As it turns out, our future lies in our own hands, and what's on our menu. Step 1. Understanding neuronutrition. 1. The looming brain health crisis. The good news. Let's start with some good news. We as a human race are living longer than ever before. Life expectancy has been steadily on the rise for over 200 years. During the 20th century in particular, there has been nothing less than a downright boom in human longevity. This dramatic increase in life expectancy ranks as one of society's greatest achievements. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, while most babies born in 1900 did not live past age 50, life expectancy now averages just under 80 years old in most industrialized countries. It turns out that the secret behind our recently extended lifespan is not due to genetics or natural selection, but rather to the relentless improvements made to our overall standard of living. From a medical and public health perspective, these developments were nothing less than game-changing. For example, major diseases such as smallpox, polio, and measles have been eradicated by mass vaccination. At the same time, better living standards achieved through improvements in education, housing, nutrition, and sanitation systems have substantially reduced malnutrition and infections, preventing many unnecessary deaths among children. Furthermore, technologies designed to improve health have become available to the masses, whether via refrigeration to prevent spoilage or systemized garbage collection, which in and of itself eliminated many common sources of disease. These impressive shifts have not only dramatically affected the ways in which civilizations eat, but also determined how civilizations will live and die. In the end, we are living longer and longer lives. In most industrialized nations, old age is now a reasonable expectation, so much so that scientists are adamant an older society is here to stay. That's good news. News that is hard-won over the millennia of the history of humankind. The not-such-good news. Now for the flip side. As it turns out, to some degree, we might be victims of our own success. Unfortunately, this increase in lifespan has not necessarily provided us with additional years of particularly high-quality health. Old age can come with wisdom, but it just as regularly arrives with some less illustrious additions: hearing loss, bifocal glasses, slower reflexes, and common medical ailments such as arthritis, rheumatisms, and respiratory problems are examples of those side effects we'd rather do without. What is of greater concern is that deterioration of the brain sneaks up on many of us as we age, making us vulnerable to memory deficits and loss of cognitive function. Over the years, I've asked countless patients, what concerns you most about your future health? More often than not, it wasn't the condition of their heart or even the risk of cancer that came to mind. Today, the greatest fear for most people is that they might end their days battling dementia. The most common cause of dementia, and probably the most feared, is the memory-robbing Alzheimer's disease. The idea of losing track of one's own thoughts, or being unable to remember our loved ones, is cause for great anxiety, fear, and stress. Equally daunting is our inevitable grief at seeing a relative or close friend suffer from this devastating disease. This concern is understandable. Of all the challenges to aging in the 21st century, nothing compares to the unprecedented scale of Alzheimer's. According to recent reports from the Alzheimer's Association, the number of people living with Alzheimer's in the United States alone is an estimated 5.3 million. As the baby boomer generation ages, the number of patients is predicted to reach a staggering 15 million cases by 2050. This is the population of Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago all together. A similar trend is observed planet-wide. Today, more than 46 million people live with dementia the world over. This number is estimated to increase to 132 million by the year 2050. Further, while Alzheimer's represents the most recognizable and most common framework for dementia, there are many ways a healthy brain can go awry. Other forms of dementia, Parkinson's disease, stroke, depression, and so forth. As more countries reap the benefits of longer lives, the burden of all these disorders is reaching an alarming proportion. If that weren't enough, beyond specific disorders, general age-related cognitive impairment might affect 3 to 4 times as many people, with extraordinary psychological, social, and economic consequences. As we take in the challenges of such an unprecedented brain health crisis, the year 2050 doesn't seem so far away. We need a cure, and we need it fast. The breaking news. Now for the news that provides us with hope. Recent medical breakthroughs have radically changed our understanding of aging and disease by showing that the brain changes leading to dementia unfold over decades before anyone ever forgets a name or loses their keys. These findings have revealed a much more complex picture than previously imagined. 2 technologies in particular have deeply changed the way we understand brain aging. On the one hand, we finally have access to cheap genomics, affordable DNA testing, which allows us to take an important peek into our genetic predispositions. While just 5 years ago, we would have had to spend thousands of dollars to do a proper genetic screening on patients, today, anyone can obtain such precious information for just a few hundred. In addition, we have lab tests, such as brain imaging, that allow us to view how the brain is functioning over time, in response to both our genetics and our lifestyle choices. Scientists now have access to sophisticated brain imaging techniques such as magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, and positron emission tomography, PET, which allow a view of the human brain from the inside out. Brain imaging has given us a rare and opportune window from which we can catch a glimpse of the actual progression of many brain diseases years in advance of any noticeable clinical symptoms. Finally, we can track the development of diseases like Alzheimer's as they unfold, and use that knowledge to identify people at risk many years, if not decades, before clinical symptoms emerge. As you'll notice, a large part of the discussion around nutrition for brain health references Alzheimer's. This is primarily because Alzheimer's is one of the few neurological diseases reaching epidemic proportions that scientists can agree is influenced by diet, and as such, it is the instigator for much of the funded research in the space. In order to figure out what people need to eat to improve or maintain optimal cognitive capacities, we need to compare people who age gracefully, from the brain's perspective, to those who unfortunately do not. In this context, Alzheimer's is in effect shorthand for the most extreme responses of the brain to the nutrients we provide. The lessons learned and behaviors to follow apply therefore to broader cognitive health as well as many, if not all, forms of cognitive decline associated with brain aging. In much the same way that following the guidelines to prevent heart disease is good for everyone, not just those at risk for cardiac events, the newly discovered dietary strategies to prevent Alzheimer's are also those that optimize cognitive health overall, over the course of a lifetime and with benefits across the board. Research findings in Alzheimer's can then be used as a framework that stands in for cognitive decline of the aging brain as a whole. By using brain imaging, several teams across the world have been successful in mapping the development of Alzheimer's over time, showing how it occurs gradually in the brain and progresses over a 20 to 40-year period before clinical symptoms emerge. In other words, cognitive impairment is not a mere consequence of old age, but rather represents the end game of years after years of accumulated insults to the brain. What's even more disconcerting is that the brain changes leading to dementia can begin as early as young adulthood, and in some cases, even from birth. As it turns out, Alzheimer's is not a disease of the old, nor does it hit without warning. Currently, our understanding is that many genetic, lifestyle, and environmental factors can potentially damage the brain while one is still young, triggering a cascade of pathological events that ultimately lead to cognitive deterioration. Whether we're referring to the somewhat typical forgetfulness and mild memory issues that many people experience around age 60, or to the full-blown dementia and loss of independent function in older age, there is a long period of time during which brain changes can be underway without the disease yet causing any noticeable symptoms. If this sounds frightening, take heart. The key message from these studies, including my own work, is that this lengthy gap leaves a precious window of time to finally and thoroughly explore the power of prevention. There is increasing evidence that implementing the lifestyle changes described in this book has the potential to prevent Alzheimer's from developing and also to help slow down or even halt progression of the disease in those who are currently suffering from dementia. If that weren't enough, eating for your brain isn't just a powerful preventative against disease, it actually helps you achieve peak performance in every part of your life. Beyond the specific fears over any particular disease, and toward a more general hope for better brain health over a longer life, this is a call to action. Anyone who is old enough to consider how their brain will remain healthy into old age is old enough to start making vital changes to address that immediately. Simply irreplaceable. Taking care of our brains is a lifelong process, mostly due to the very nature of our brain cells. In fact, our brain cells, or neurons, are literally irreplaceable. This is a major difference between the brain and the other organs in our body. In the rest of the body, cells are constantly replaced. Think about how fast your hair and nails can grow. But the brain lacks the capacity to continuously grow new neurons. While some neurons do continue to grow as we age, the vast majority stay with us for a lifetime, rendering them particularly susceptible to the wear and tear that naturally occur as part of the aging process. This is why diseases like Alzheimer's are so devastating. They deliver the final uppercut to neurons that can't be regrown. All of this means that we need to pay even greater attention to the health of our brain cells, since, by and large, they might very well be the only ones we will ever have. This is especially important given the limited insight we have as to what's going on inside our brains. Often enough, we don't even realize that our brains are suffering until an interior problem grows severe enough to produce external symptoms, such as loss of consciousness, hallucinations, or cognitive deficits. For example, it is not uncommon that people who suffer a concussion keep going about their business for hours or days before finally feeling faint or confused. For a more common example, many of us do not realize that our brains are running low on fuel until we become lightheaded and can't think straight anymore. Why is there such a disconnect between the state of our brains and our awareness of it? For one thing, we cannot see our brains, but even more to the point is that we cannot feel them. This is another major difference between the brain and the rest of our body. For all the chatter that goes on inside it, the one thing the brain is not very good at, letting us in on its own condition. This is not its fault, however. As opposed to everywhere else in the body, there are no pain sensors in the brain. As such, there is no way to feel brain pain. If someone were to touch your brain, you wouldn't feel a thing. That's why surgeons are able to perform brain surgery on a patient, even while the patient is still awake. Most people confuse having a migraine or a headache as pain generated inside their brains. How often have we said something like, "I had a migraine so bad I thought my head was going to split in half." Expressing it that way is more literal than we realize. It is, in fact, our heads that hurt, not our brains. This happens when the muscles in the neck and shoulders, not in the brain, stay semi-contracted for a period of time. For example, after spending several hours in front of a computer. Such tension can also radiate to the muscles in the face and scalp, activating the body's pain sensors located there and signaling discomfort. This is what most people confuse for brain pain. Next time you have a headache, take a good stretch. What all this boils down to is that not only can't our brain cells be replaced, they can't even sound the alarm when there is a problem. As a result, we remain oblivious to our brain's health. However, there are several things we can do to help our neurons stay strong and avoid unpleasant surprises down the line. Our ability to intervene and change the course of aging and disease is made possible by the remarkable abilities of the brain itself. Hundreds of scientific studies have shown that the human brain is quite the fighter. A healthy brain can take a lot of punches before being knocked out, or in biological terms, before exhausting itself to capacity. Then, and only then, do symptoms occur. This is because the brain possesses its own reserve, just as an auxiliary.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?